Thank you for your warm welcome. I've never been to the Macedonian church before. Thank you for your smiles. And judged by my name and my pronunciation, you can tell I wasn't born here. My full name is Piroska Feith. I was born in Hungary under the communist regime. And I was born in a typical communist family, a very dysfunctional family. I don't know who my father is. My mother was an alcoholic, a very aggressive one. And as I was growing up, as a child, we were brainwashed against Christianity. From a young age, I remember going to school, and those kids who had mental or physical disabilities of any shape or form, they were not allowed to come to our school or to a school. They had to be kept separate. And we were constantly taught by our teachers that they were lower class citizens. And I remember walking past this school from time to time, seeing the kids there. My heart just ached for them. But then they told us, if you ever toy with the idea of Christianity, you are even lower than them. And that's what we grew up with. And I remember I was 13 when my first friend died, then 14, another one. And standing at that funeral, I was wondering, what's after death? What this life is all about? Am I next? And my quest for search began. I soon found out there is a supernatural world. I brushed shoulders with the occult. By God's grace, it freaked me out, if I can put it that way. I was very uncomfortable, but I knew there is a supernatural power. And my life was spiraling down. I can't tell you all the details, but I remember that in 1991, just after communism fell, the Adventist Church in Australia, the Union Conference, decided to send the young people to these eastern communist countries where communism fell to preach the gospel. And there were 3 groups sent. One to Poland, I believe, one to Yugoslavia, and one to Hungary. And with each bunch of young people, they sent a pastor. And one of these groups landed in my hometown. And there were about 15 Australian young people and one pastor, Pastor Tony Campbell, just from the eastern suburbs here. And I remember that, to cut the long story short, I started attending those meetings. And that's where I first heard about God. And I remember when I heard about creation for the first time in my life, my response was right throughout, as Pastor Campbell went through it, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. It's like, that's it. Why didn't someone tell me this before? But of course, my heart was yearning to have that peace that he had, despite of the tragedies in his life. I said, how can he have such confidence? And then I learned that it was his faith in God that made him so centered. And I said, I want to have that faith. And at those meetings, attending time after time, remembering when I first held the Bible in my hand for the first time, looking for books and chapters, and I gave my heart to God. And I said, God, I want you in my life. And I not only want you in my life, but God put it on my heart. I want to do what that pastor was doing. I want to lead others to Christ. Because what else is important? There's so many people out there like me who knew nothing about life and completely, running down on a track that leads to eternal death and are struggling. I want to lead people to Christ. Now, when I told my mother I'm going to get baptized, she told me, well, never come home. And she didn't say it with that tone. She was screaming at me. And I knew that my days were numbered. I didn't dare to go home until 2 a.m. that day. And within a month or two, I was out of there. I had no stay. Because becoming a Christian, although it was post-communist, it was still a shame on the family. And I was ridiculed by my classmates, I remember, because I applied for going to theology and I got accepted. And it wasn't an easy journey, but God gave me strength. People tell me that, wow, you were so strong. I tell you what, when you are thrown in those situations, God will give you the strength. I didn't think of it at all that I was strong, but at that time, God gave me the strength, and He'll give it to you. It's not about being strong. It's about relying on the one we're following and trusting Him. And when I completed my theological studies, they told me which churches I'm going to get in 1 year. But I had a 1 year gap, and Pastor Campbell asked me, would you come out here and work with me so I can teach you ministry here in Melbourne? And I just got married, and my husband said, who comes from a loving Christian Adventist family, he said, okay, we can go, but strictly for 1 year. And I said, yep, that's fine. That was in 1996. We came strictly for 1 year. And 27 years later, we're still here. God opened doors. We didn't plan on it, but when you step through those doors, you know that He has you. He has you. And we have two amazing kids, Victoria and Adam. Adam is 13, Victoria is 17. And we started ministry in Western Australia. That's where they employed me as the first female pastor in 2000. And once my children were born, I stayed home with them for 10 years because to me that was a priority, being home with them. But once the youngest one started full-time schooling, I went back part-time. And then my husband said, hey, I'm missing out on being a dad. He worked long hours. He said, can I stay home and you go back full-time? So that actually happened. And he did all the excursions, you know, the dad things, the piano classes, the swimming classes, and some of the cooking and some of the cleaning. And our kids had, I believe, a very balanced upbringing because of that. 2 years ago, I got the call to come to Melbourne. And after much consideration, we accepted it. So currently, I'm pastoring Nunawading Church in the eastern suburbs, and also working for the conference as the Associate Ministerial Association Secretary. I know it's a mouthful, but what it means is two of us are the pastor of the pastors. So we look after them, we make sure that the theology is up to scratch, they are visited, they are looked after, and that they're meeting regularly, and that they are healthy both physically and spiritually. So that's my story in a nutshell. Why did I share it with you? I shared it with you, number one, because we have a connection. You know, you said, I hope you're feeling home. I tell you, I feel more at home than anywhere else, you know, when I'm sitting with you. But I also shared it with you because often we give our offerings to mission projects, and we don't know where that money lands, do we? We give it, we saw the Sabbath school offering. I want that campground at Switzerland to work, you know, all year around, and I'll give my offering, but I won't really know the effect, you know, or what happens. But I can tell you what, because at one time the Australian Union in 1990 was fundraising, offerings after offering, to send these 100 young people over to Eastern Europe. And people gave their offerings, and they probably never heard the stories, but I'm one of those. And there's so many more, hundreds and thousands more, whose lives changed because of an offering. So thank you when you give your offering. Lives are changed. And I think that's why heaven will be an amazing place to be at, because we'll hear all these stories, all the lives we touched that we didn't even know about. So thank you, welcome, and now you know a little bit more about me, and I look forward to getting to know you even more. So today I would like to talk about encountering God. What does it mean to really come to God face to face? I would like to give credit to the people on the screen. I read widely, and they do influence my sermons. First of all, I would like to start with a story. I read about this story in Reader's Digest, and I can't find it. It was decades ago, when they tried a new submarine out. And the submarine was the one that could go to the deepest levels of the ocean, in places they'd never been, like the Mariana Trench. And when they tried that submarine out, a technical problem occurred at the deepest point that submarine ever ventured to. And they, as a result, could not surface the submarine. But they were continually in contact with the crew, and especially the captain of the submarine. And as they tried to work on land and on the submarine to fix the problem, another problem occurred. The air cleaner broke down. And once the air cleaner breaks down, you know that your time is limited. And they tried everything. They worked around the clock, but they could not surface the submarine in time. And the submarine's captain's last words were these: "We tried everything. We know you did the same. Nothing worked." And his last words in a faint voice: "In vain." And that was the last time they heard from the crew. And when I read this article, I thought about how often do we utter these words, in vain, for nothing. When you try your best, you try your best to achieve a goal, for something positive, for something good. And as our strength is ebbing away, and as the goal starts to evaporate, we utter these words, in vain. I have done my best for no purpose. I'm sure you've been there. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Maybe this is exactly what Simon, the fisherman, felt when he said, and I quote from Luke chapter 5, verse 5, "Master, we worked hard all night and haven't caught anything." Master, we worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. This is the story I would like us to dig into today. And to start up, I would like to take you back to, on a map, where this story was unfolding. We're at the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee, or it often referred in the Bible as well as Lake of Gennesaret. And you would think it's a big body of water, but it's about 21 kilometers at the longest part and about 13 kilometers wide at the longest part across. So in a good weather, you can clearly see the other shore. It wasn't that big of a body of water. Now, there is a small fishing village called Capernaum where Jesus came to after being rejected in Nazareth. He enters the town on Sabbath, and he goes to the synagogue where he heals, the first healing ministry he performs there, and he teaches. And after leaving the synagogue, he goes to Peter's house, Simon Peter's house, and that's where his mother-in-law was. And if you recall the story, his mother-in-law was quite sick. We could say that she was ill. And this is where we pick up the story from. So Jesus' first day in Capernaum, he's just starting his ministry. He healed a person at the temple he taught. And now he is in Simon Peter's house. And it's not a big place at all, as you can see from the ruins. So in Luke chapter 4 and verse 38, it says, now you're welcome to follow it in your own Bible. If you don't have a Bible on you, I'm going to put up the text. And today I'm using the New English Translation because it's the closest to the original in this story. So it's in Luke chapter 4 and verse 38. And this is how the story goes. After Jesus left the synagogue, he entered Simon's house. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. Now the whole family cared about this lady very much. And they didn't like to see her sick. So they asked Jesus to help. Why did they ask Jesus to help? Don't forget, an hour or two before, he just healed someone at the temple. It was a miracle. And they said, hey, you did that to him. Can you please do that for her? Because we care about her very much. What was Jesus' response? He says in verse 39, he stood over her, commanded the fever, and it left her. Immediately she got up and began to serve them. This was the second miracle in Capernaum, right in front of Simon Peter's eyes. And of course, after this, Jesus' fame spread rapidly over Judea. Then we arrive to the chapter 5 in the Gospel of Luke. Let's pick up the story from here. Now, Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing around him to hear the word of God. He saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then Jesus sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. Here we see Peter, James, John and their partners finishing their work for the day. Now they were washing their nets at the end of a very unproductive shift, wouldn't you agree? That is because they didn't catch a single fish, not one. Later on, as we read at the beginning, Peter admits, Master, we worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. Do you think Peter was desperate? Do you think he was bitter? Of course he was. His hungry family was waiting for him at home. To them, fish meant food, clothes, in one word, living. And he worked all night and there is no show for it. Can you imagine putting in a lot of work and nothing in return? I love your flower arrangements. I love the flower and garden show. Just imagine you put in all the work and the next day you go in and it's all demolished for whatever reason. You would be heartbroken. Tomorrow, it will happen tomorrow. But you would be heartbroken, wouldn't you? And that's what happened to Peter. Not a single fish. He was tired, he was disappointed, and although his work was in vain, it wasn't finished. Why? Because they still had to clean the nets, get them ready for the next night's fish. They had to clean and fix. Then Jesus shows up in the middle of the cleaning process, and he asks him to take him out on his boat so he can continue to teach the people. The crowd was big. They were pressing against him, and he needed a bit of room, just a bit of separation on the water. Now, I don't know what went through Peter's mind. That's one question to ask him in heaven. Maybe he remembered how Jesus healed his mother-in-law. And maybe he thought, well, he helped me. I guess I have to help him out. Maybe he was eardropping on Jesus' teaching. And maybe he thought, actually, I want to hear more. We don't know why, but Peter agrees. Although he has all the reason to say, I'm tired. I haven't slept all night. It's time to go home, get ready for tonight. He doesn't. He lets Peter get into his boat and takes him out. Now, in Israel, at that part of the country, from time to time, there is a drought. And in 1986, there was such a big drought that the level of water in the Sea of Galilee dropped much lower than ever before. And they actually discovered the remains of this first century fishing boat. And they identified that this is from the era when Jesus was teaching and preaching in Galilee. Now, I'm not saying this is the boat, please don't misunderstand me, but this is the shape, the size, the look, the feel that Jesus actually stepped into when he was teaching the crowd. And the interesting thing that this boat is a sketch of this, that it's about 8.5 meters long and 2.5 meters wide. So we are not talking about a small dinghy. It was a decent size fishing boat. And Jesus steps in it and teaches the crowd. Then the story continues in verses 4 and 5. We are in Luke chapter 5. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and lower your nets for catch." Simon answered, "Master, we worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but at your word, I will lower the nets." Let me remind you that by this time, Peter must have been exhausted. And Jesus asks him to do the unthinkable. Set out in broad daylight to do fishing. Now, if you go to the Lake of Galilee today and you talk to fishermen, they will tell you the only way to catch fish in that lake is at night. Maybe you have a chance in the morning if you are fishing on the shady side of the boat, opposite where the sun is coming up from, but you have very limited chances of catching anything. And when I learned that, I was wondering, what could Peter see in Jesus' eyes? What could this tough fisherman see in Jesus' eyes that he was ready to let down his nets at the most impossible time and at the most impossible place? How does it come that he doesn't lose his temper with Jesus? How does it come he doesn't tell him, "Excuse me, yes, you healed my mother-in-law, and I think I repaid your debt by taking you out so you can teach the crowd, but please do not interfere with my work. After all, what do you know about fishing, carpenter? I have been doing this since I was a child." What do you know about fishing, carpenter? How come he doesn't lose his temper at Jesus' command? Jesus is not asking him to go out. He's telling him, "Now you go out and let down your nets." Now let's not forget it was Simon's boat. He was the captain of his boat. But by this command, Jesus is taking over the captainship of the boat. Wow. What would I have done if I were there? I don't know what went through Peter's mind. I can't imagine, and I try not to imagine it. But I know one thing. I'm sure he realized that on that boat, it wasn't him who was important, but Jesus. Because you say so, he says, I will let down the nets. It is you and your words that count, not mine. It doesn't matter what I want. It doesn't matter that I know what I want is good. But the only thing that matters is what you want. So I would like to ask you a few questions today. And the first one is, can you do the same as Peter did? Can you separate from the crowd, from the shore, to start out towards the deep water where there is no one else, just you and Jesus? Can you start out with this attitude because you say so, I will do it? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit within my schedule. It doesn't sit well where I am right now in life. But because you say so, I will do it. I'll go out into the deep if you come with me. Peter let Jesus become the captain of his boat. What happens next? Verses 6 and 7. When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets started to tear. So they motioned to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they were about to sink. Remember that boat that they discovered? Remember the size of the boat? Almost 10 meters long and 2.5 meters wide. That's a lot of fish. That's a lot of freshwater fish to fill that boat. Hearing the story so far, it would be so sinful and so human to continue it this way. Simon Peter, being a very experienced fisherman, assessed the miracle, and he could have said to Jesus, "Look, Jesus, if two men like us unite, great things can happen. Let's enter into partnership with one another, you and me." But there isn't a more dangerous trap than this. You and me. Me and Jesus, I will obey if he rewards. That's a trap for any Christian. I will do it, whatever you want, as long as there is a reward for it. And so many people fail because of this trap. But Peter didn't. Because he realized on that board that there was only Jesus important. Peter realized who Jesus was and kept a close watch on Jesus like the shepherd keeps a close watch on the evening star. I can say it here, you understand what I mean, the evening star. Because when the evening star rose in the northern hemisphere, you know exactly where true north is. You don't have to guess and calculate. You know where true north is. And that was their guide. And when that star rose, the shepherd couldn't say, "Oh, it's the star and I shining." No, it can at most say the star shines and I watch how it shines. Or as the bow fits in the violinist's hand, and the bow can't say that I and the master, at most it could say the master used me. Or as the patient and the surgeon, after a successful operation, the patient can't say that I and the surgeon. At most, the patient can say that the surgeon fixed me. Peter didn't say either me and Jesus, nor did he say Jesus and I. He said something entirely different. Because at that point, he didn't want to turn this whole situation into his personal gain. But while the net is full of fish and start to break, while the boat's almost starting to sink, he falls on that wet and dirty deck of his boat and says, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Go away from me, for I am a sinful man. For Peter and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of the fish that they had taken, and so were James and John, Zebedee's son, who was Simon's business partner. What happened here? Can I highlight one word that will tell you what took place here? No, I can't see it. There it is, in yellow. That one word gives away what happened here. Lord. Do you know how Peter called Jesus up till this moment? Do you remember how he addressed him? He addressed him Master. Master means teacher, respected teacher. It was very polite, someone you look up to. But at this point, he addresses him Lord. He accepted him, not only recognized that he was the Messiah, he gave his life to him, he accepted him. And we see that. He kneels down on that dirty fishing boat at the feet of Jesus. Now, think about it. The crowd probably hasn't left. They were watching what's going on. Why are these fishermen going out fishing in broad daylight? That doesn't make sense. They probably could see the miracle taking place. Can you imagine that large vessel full of fish? Can you imagine the smell, the touch, the fish flipping all around? And it's full to the brink. And what does Peter do? He kneels down in front of Jesus in the middle of that mess. And people could see him. What is he doing? They're going to judge him over this action. But Peter became not only the captain of his boat, but at that point, Jesus becomes the captain of Peter's life. My second question to you, have you ever knelt before Jesus like this? When you realize not only the multitude of his blessings, but the multitude of your sin. You know, it's like, we often say our life is like a candle, like a light of a candle that gives a bit of light and a bit of warmth in this dark world. But I challenge you, what happens when a floodlight is switched on behind that candlelight? And that candlelight actually casts its shadow on the wall. And the question is, can you see the light, the real light? And at that light, can you see the shadows of your life that might have seemed to you this light before? Wow. Because that's how God grows us. Things that we thought were light before in our life and our own deeds can actually be shadows. But that only happens as God grows us. Now then Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching people. So when they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Now Peter had to understand that all this happened not only just for him, but for people he hasn't known yet. Of course, Peter knew the area very well. Let me show you this map. Can you see the lake of Gennesaret right on the top, that blue lake? The river Jordan flows into from the north. And in the bottom of that lake, it flows out. And about 120 kilometers further south, it flows into the Dead Sea, right at the bottom, the long blue lake. The river of Jordan is full of life, full of fish. It's green, it's alive. In complete contrast with the Dead Sea. The same Jordan River flows into the sea, but it's desolate and barren. It's covered with thick salt. So why is the contrasting difference between the two seas when the life-giving fresh water flows into both of them? Notice that while the life-giving fresh water not only flows into the Sea of Galilee, but at the other end, at the south part, it flows out. In the Dead Sea, the fresh water only flows into the sea, but not out. And because of the evaporation, its salt content is higher and higher, which impede the development of any kind of life, hence its word or title, the Dead Sea. Doesn't this illustration apply to our spiritual life as well? If we don't feel that it is our calling, our mission, our purpose to share the gospel with others, through our words and our actions, then we can become like the Dead Sea. You know, I love these times when we come together, when we open the Bible, when we praise God, when he fills us up, not only together as a community, but in our everyday life, when we sit with him, when we pray. But if that's where it stops, we are in trouble. If we don't feel it is our duty after being filled up to go out there and share that gospel with others, by words, sometimes by being quiet, actions or inactions, then we're going to become like the Dead Sea. So question number 3, which sea describes your spiritual life the best? And if you are leaning towards the one at the bottom, may I challenge you to do some soul searching and ask God to provide you opportunities where you can be his mouth, his hands and feet. I heard a story about a vet. After he got his degree, they put him in a small village, and for days no one came to him, and he got discouraged. Sitting on a bench in front of his clinic one day, he spotted a dog across the road. It was limping. It was a stray dog, and immediately after watching him for a minute, he said, "That dog's leg is broken." So being a vet with a lot of time, he whistled and the dog came to him. And then he took him into his practice. He fixed up the dog's leg. And even after he took the cast off, the dog stayed with him. And he was so happy he wasn't alone. But one day the dog disappeared, and although he looked for him, couldn't find him. And that night, while he was watching TV, He heard scraping on his door and whimpering. So he opened the door, and there was his dog, and next to him another dog. Its leg was broken. This is what the vet said. I don't know how he did it, but my dog brought another one to me for treatment. If I can add something to this story, do we have at least this much responsibility for the others? We have come to Jesus. We are healed. We are fine. What about our neighbors, our colleagues? What about our friends, our family members, or strangers out there who know nothing about Jesus? Do we have at least this much responsibility for the other? And he finishes with this story. Now, from now on, you will catch men. Jesus sent Peter to catch people for life. And at the end he says, so when they have brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Now, since I'm in Australia, I saw many cyclones. Fortunately, only on television. But I remember the very first one I followed through the news. It was called Thelma. And I still remember as the forecast came, the people of Broome had to leave their town. And as the dark clouds rolled in, so did the buses that transported the people to a safe place. I can still see it if I close my eyes, that the people were in panic. And they tried to quickly pack up their most important and sentimental belongings. And they boarded these buses with a few plastic bags. And as the buses pulled out, they looked back, and there were tears in their eyes, and they kept looking back and looking back until the bus disappeared on the horizon. Peter and his friends left their belongings behind in a different way, didn't they? The Bible doesn't mention any tears, doesn't mention any looking back, desperation or sadness. Why? Because they didn't look at their material goods. They didn't look at their life and what they built up, but they looked at Jesus, only at Jesus. And when we do that, there is absolutely nothing we cannot leave behind. So that's the story of Luke chapter 5. And I don't know where you are in your journey with God. Maybe you are like Peter. You are in a storm. You are experiencing the trouble. Master, we worked hard all night, haven't caught anything. Maybe you are desperate, you are disillusioned. You feel that the storms are just raging on and you can't see God. And then Jesus shows up and says, can I spend some time with you? Maybe you are sitting at Jesus' feet and looking at him as the teacher. And you admire him, you love his teaching, you are eardropping, but you're not quite there yet. And Jesus says, can we go out to the deep? Maybe you are out with Jesus in the deep and you're doing the unthinkable. God, I'm here, what am I doing? Letting down the nets. And at that time you are experiencing the multitude of his blessings. Maybe you are at that point where you're pulling in all the fish and life is just good, because you are basking in his blessings. Maybe you are at a point where you recognize that you are a sinner, that he is not just the teacher, he is the Lord. And when you recognize his goodness, you can't do anything else but to see the multitude of your sin, and you are kneeling in front of him. Maybe Jesus is getting you up and says, okay, this happened not only just for you, I've got something bigger for you. Now go and catch men for life. Maybe you are on the shore, you see all the fish, you understand your calling, and you have to make a decision. Am I going to leave everything behind? Am I ready to do that? Can I do that? The bottom line is, it doesn't matter where you are. We're not supposed to compare where we are. But the real question is, are you willing to make the next step in your journey? Because it's not who gets to the end, but who doesn't stop, but continually journeys with God, no matter where he takes him. That's the person who encounters God on a daily basis. So I pray and hope that in the good, in the bad, and in the ugly of life on this side of eternity, you have a glimpse of God, you hear his voice, and you are ready to act on it. May God bless you as you wrestle with these thoughts.